Cool. Well, let's get started then. My name is Sam Quinn. I'm a security researcher at McAfee's Advanced Threat Research Team, and I'll be walking you through some of the vulnerabilities I found in educational software last year. Just a little bit more about me. I've been a part of the Advanced Threat Research Team for about 2.5 years. I've always been in the mindset of hacking things from an early age, taking things apart, rarely putting them back together. I actually currently live in Portland, Oregon. You can see Mount Hood right there behind me in this picture. When I'm not hacking, I like to go skiing, hiking, mountain biking, getting outdoors. I also am pretty avid of my home automation and tinkering and things like that, or just trying to keep my Linux distribution alive. If you want to find me on Twitter, my handle is EIP. And that's enough about me. Let's get into it. Um, so a lot of that we do, a part of our security researching team, is we try to think like the attackers. We try to find industries that have either emerged as a high impact target, or try to find things that have been overlooked. And one of the things that we haven't hit on yet was the school software. And last year, the ZDNet article published that 2020 had a record-breaking number of cybersecurity incidents inside of school districts and things like that. So it's kind of brought our attention to the whole industry of school software. And so we kind of began to look for software that would have a large user base and things like that. And that's kind of when we stumbled upon NetUp Vision Pro. NetUp Vision Pro has around 6 million teachers and students using their software, and around 9,000 plus school districts. NetUp Vision, or NetUp, is the parent company, and they encompass around like 100 million users worldwide with all their other products. And then I kind of want to explain a little bit of how the attack surface has opened up due to like e-learning and hybrid learning. Normally, NetUp Vision Pro is designed to be used on a local network where it is confined to like a classroom or a computer lab. But we've started to identify that some of these exceptions due to like hybrid learning, that these kind of computers with the software installed could be taken off the walled garden of a district network, and kind of opens up the attack surface to this kind of software that was previously not very common. And just as an example, Hillsborough County Public Schools were like lending out school district owned computers to the students to continue learning remotely. So let me explain a little bit more about how the software kind of works and what it's meant for. It's technically considered a student management software, where a teacher has a client and can view and kind of remotely manage all of the students in that classroom. They can perform a handful of administrative tasks like blanking the screen. They can even perform like remote control, like an RDP session on their remote PCs. They can view their screenshots, like what they're currently doing, start applications, and like even shut down the computer. The way that this is handled to make it tamper resistant is this software is actually on the student installed as a system service, and is actually like started at boot, so it can't be disabled by the student without administrative privileges. And that's to probably prevent them from just disabling it and not participating in class or whatnot. So let's put on our hacking shoes here and dive into some of the technical details. Like I mentioned earlier, as a security researcher, we like to get into the mindset of an attacker, and these are kind of what we identified as the goals that an attacker or a malicious actor would have come across if they decided to attack this type of software. Knowing that it's not internet based, they would be trying to look to find a local network attack. It's much better than a physical access, and then they would probably want to try to remote control the student PC either through the RDP, full remote control, or like a command line instance just running remote code on their PC. And then lastly, they would most likely want to improve their position on the compromised machine. So how did we begin? We, first of all, once we identified NetOp Vision as our target, we actually found that they had a free 30-day trial. So it's pretty easy and fast to get our reverse engineering hat on and start looking at how this software was running. I personally like free trials, but it is a pretty easy way for even attackers or whatnot to kind of get a handle of how this application is running in the back end. And then we next we set up like a test environment where we made a handful of VMs where we made one the teacher, the others the students. And really at this stage, we're trying to identify the most common install. So we're trying to enumerate through the installers on all of the students to make sure that we have a normal environment. And there's nothing worse than finding a vulnerability in some software and then you found out you configured it insecurely or something, and no one does that out in the wild. So we're trying to, at this stage, trying to figure out what the most common install is, and there wasn't many options to change, so it was quite easy to make sure we're kind of on a default settings here. And then next we try to become the teacher a little bit. We wanted to narrow down our scope, go through many of these actions a teacher could do, figure out what kind of functions that the software can perform and how it's facilitated in the back end, and which ones as an attacker would be good to start looking at. This application had quite a bit of code paths, and we wanted to start narrowing down what is hackable here. And then lastly, we kind of took an overall view of these two installs, the student and the teacher, and wanted to identify the similarities or differences between the two, and the commonalities. If we found a vulnerability in one, does it transfer to the teacher, and vice versa. And pretty quickly, we identified that the student actually has a lot more interesting binaries and DLLs and things like that that we can, as an attacker, they had a bigger attack surface, I guess I can say. And then one other thing we noticed is all the student clients run a system, probably to prevent tampering. And then the teacher clients was using the same main executable, but in like server mode, I would say. And they would only run the application as their logged in user. So at this point, we kind of wanted to attack the students, and there's probably more students than teachers, and that means more devices that we could potentially hit. So we, at this point, decided to take a look at the students. And now that we have kind of a groundwork of how the application is laid out, let's start enumerating through some of these goals. So the first thing we noticed was that the whole concept of encryption was not applied here. So all of the network traffic while we were eavesdropping on the local network was sent in plain text. Even sensitive things like this Windows username and Windows password was just sent in plain text over from the teacher to the student. So in this screenshot, yeah, this one, the teacher's actually trying to perform a login action on the remote PC. That's just one of the administrative actions the teacher can perform on the students. And then in the green and red down there, they are just shown in plain text on the Wireshark capture. But it wasn't just the login credentials, like everything, like I mentioned, was sent in plain text. So when the teacher would run an application on the remote PC, you can see calculator. It is shown in plain text in the Wireshark capture as well. And same with the screenshots. So whenever a student connects to a classroom, they instantly begin sharing their screen to the teacher so they can kind of keep an eye on the whole classroom. Those are also sent in plain text, and using a tool like DriftNet here, we were able to just eavesdrop these images sent over the network. And to kind of fill in our system architecture a little bit, So now we've identified that all of the network traffic is unencrypted. I want to point out that there's a lot of the different functions that the teacher can provide actually talk and communicate on different ports. And so there's some TCP ports and UDP ports throughout this ecosystem here. And this was our first finding in CVE we published against them. And clear text transmission of sensitive information. Not only the Windows credentials, but also the screenshots and even the applications could be considered sensitive. And just to kind of highlight on how easy it was for an attacker to do this was all we had to do is be on the local network, wherever the student clients are, have a Wi-Fi card or a network card that supports promiscuous mode, and then a wireless or a network sniffer that can capture this traffic, like Wireshark, DriftNet for the pictures, things like that. And there's many others. So just to recap on our goals, we didn't actually achieve a local network attack through that because it was kind of passively just eavesdropping on the network, but we were able to compromise some Windows credentials through that. And just to kind of enumerate on how we've gotten to this point, all we had to do is get access to the software. We set up a mock classroom, and then pretty quickly identified that all network traffic was sent unencrypted. We also noticed that teachers have like full control over the students. The students can't deny these requests at all. They can start applications, things like that. And all of the student installs run as system. So let's dive into our next goal of trying to figure out how we could potentially remote control these students and see if an attacker could do the same. And kind of given that the teacher's actions are already pretty useful for an attacker, the ability to see their screen, and then even that whole the ability to start applications remotely, that's pretty big. So we wanted to think like the person we want to become. So we want to become or emulate a teacher in this respect. And to highlight on some of the things a teacher can do that's better than just being a normal person on the network or another student. The teachers are always considered trusted. It doesn't matter if it's during class time or off, whatever network it is these devices find themselves on. If a teacher connects and tells it to do an action like start an application or blank the screen, the students have no way of denying or rejecting these actions. A lot of the actions that a teacher can perform could also be useful as an attacker, like I mentioned earlier. And then also the screenshots automatically start sharing. So at this point, I really want to become a teacher or emulate a teacher from an attacker's perspective. But the next we had to figure out how to find these students. Now that we want to target them, we wanted to figure out how we could find them. And thankfully, all of the students actually beacon out or broadcast out their presence on the local network. And you can see in like green here, that's the student computer name. The blue is the MAC address, and then the red is just their IP address in hex. So really everything an attacker would need to kind of create a list of these targets and then potentially iterate through each one, performing a handful of actions or attacking each one individually. But before we can attack them, we kind of had to figure out how they connect, how the teacher facilitates the connection to the student. And diving back into Wireshark, we captured like a handful of these connections, the handshakes between the teacher and the student. And we identified that there's around 11 packets in a handshake. And then I want to point out that there's these two UDP messages in the beginning. This teacher is actually a listening socket, and all the students are actually outbound traffic to the teacher. So the teacher would actually broadcast, or not broadcast, I guess, send a UDP message to the student. The student would respond with another UDP message in a similar format. And then it's actually the student that connects to the teacher. So the teacher has to just have like a listening connection, and all the students connect to the teacher. So that was one thing we found. And through the handful of handshakes that we've captured, we started to diff with them and see what was being dynamically created, and kind of trying to see how the handshake was facilitated. And we actually only identified 3 unique elements that were being dynamically created. The rest of the packets were actually just static, so a direct replay could be used there. And the 3 unique elements were all unique D words that we ended up having to identify. The token 1 we noticed was unique to each teacher. Token 2 was unique to each student. And then token 3 was, we actually called it just token 3 in our Python output for the majority of our research, until one day when we started to notice that range of that D word started to look familiar, and we typed it into WinDebug here with like the bang address, and it's actually a heap address, and it's, so the student was actually just sending over a heap address, kind of, I guess, as a unique identifier or something. I was hoping to use it in an exploit at some point, but we never got around to it. But I just thought that was kind of an odd thing. So after we kind of were able to enumerate through all of the dynamic fields that a handshake needed to be completed successfully, we started to try to script up a solution to emulate the teacher. And on the left here, these are just a few of the packets that we created. We created Scapy layers for them. If you haven't used Scapy, it's a great tool for network communication and replaying and modification and everything on, and it's all facilitated through Python. So, and I also kind of want to point out that a lot of them we still didn't actually know what each field did at the end. So there's a lot of UKWs. Those were just unknown values, but we identified as much as we could through reverse engineering and kind of changing values and seeing what they do. So we were able to change everything we needed to do for a handshake to be completed successfully. And then this is just some of the wrapper Python code of just kind of showing how most of the packets aren't actually being changed at all. All we're changing is like the target IP, the tokens, and things like that. So, and then lastly, like the command, since this one's trying to emulate the run command action. So it was pretty easy to actually get a replay working on this. And that's kind of what I'll show here in this video as a demo. So these are all student computers, all these Windows PCs. And this is the attackers window here. So if I start this video, yep, we'll see that if we type in -C PowerShell, it'll actually scan on the network just for only 5 seconds. And that's long enough for it to capture all of the student broadcast out packets to identify their IP address and things like that. And then we create a list of those IP addresses and then execute, just replay the command with PowerShell. And so I changed it to the second one on here to just run calculator. And I also want to point out that since we are actually emulating a teacher, these vision client disconnecting and connecting to the student, they have no way of authenticating or validating that our Python script is a Python script or a real teacher. So they greatly execute any command we tell them to, thinking that we're actually their teacher, even though it's just a Python script at this point. And so this kind of brought us into our second finding with a CVE here of incorrect authorization, because the student has no way of authorizing or authenticating the teacher. We thought that deserved a CVE. And so now if we look at our goals, we've accomplished a local network attack and also the remote control of the student. Um, Granted that it's a just arbitrary code execution, that's still remote control. So to kind of recap on how we got here, um, we can passively identify these targets on the network, these students that have this software installed. We can dynamically spoof the handshake by filling in those 3D words that we're changing. The rest is just static. We can modify the actions that are performed from the teacher. We showed in the last demo the application execution, and we've modified that to PowerShell, calculator, whatever we want. And that kind of leads into the fourth one, where we now have arbitrary code execution or commands that can be executed on the remote machine. But we still have a privilege escalation that we want to hit on. So let's dive into that. And I want to bring up that in the previous demo, while we were starting those calculators and PowerShells and everything, that was actually being executed as the student, even though the parent application, all of the NetApp Vision binaries are being ran as system. The back end drops the privileges correctly. That's good to see. As a security researcher, we like when companies are actually taking that kind of steps to secure their product. So if they didn't, this project would be done right here. But so that was good to see. It just we wanted to see if there was any way around it. And like I said earlier, all of the plugins, like the screenshot viewer, the web filtering, the chat application, they're all running a system, but they do drop the privileges to that of the student if there's any way to execute code. So we wanted to see how that was kind of facilitated in the main binary itself. And so we brought open the code in IDA, and I want to point out that this left here, this whole left path, and all of this code here is just wrapper code to find the current logged in user and eventually drop privileges before calling shell execute somewhere down here of the command that we typed in. There was a path that just goes directly to shell execute, which would execute the code as system. However, we weren't able to find any ways to set that. It seemed to be reading a value, like a variable from the registry at boot and then never reading it again. So we weren't unfortunately able to hit this path, but this kind of got us thinking, do all of the shell executes in all of the binaries, including the plugins, have this wrapper code, or did they forget to add it to a few? And that's when we started to just parse through all of the code, finding all of the shell executes, and we noticed a few that weren't. So right off the bat, I want to point out that these were all local privilege escalations. None of them were accessible over the network, but we were able to find a few what I like to call mouse-based local privilege escalations. So if this one, number one here, the support page, is what you see on IDA on the right. It was executing Internet Explorer, but without dropping the privileges to that of the logged in user, with a pre-filled URL for their support page. And then once you have Internet Explorer running as system, it's pretty easy to go to like save as and click around and eventually get to through the Explorer, get to system 32 and then execute like CMD, for instance. So we were able to do that. And then for the next 2 through 4, they all had a save as button. So like you could save the system info, you could save screenshots and save your chat dialogue that you had. And the save as opens the file explorer again with system, and you can click around and eventually get it to execute code. with system. But since we didn't have access to the mouse, this wasn't a viable solution for us. We still wanted to try to do something remotely, but that did give us our third CVE of incorrect privilege assignment. But yeah, so we still wanted to try to figure out how to do this over the network. And that's kind of when we started to look, the main binary that was shared between the teacher and the student actually did wrap all of their shell executes properly. And so we started to look at some of the plugins that were available, and a lot of the teacher actions would execute these plugin binaries on the remote student's PC. And we kind of directed our attention to this chat feature. And we noticed this when we were downloading the free trial, and this kind of helped us remember that this could be an issue where the teacher, when they send a document to the student, for one, the ability to like send files is interesting as an attacker, but also it seemed to have launched in the system context, so they might still have problems with that. So we wanted to investigate that a little bit more and kind of see how the file operations were handled, how this chat application was sending these files. And that's when we kind of realized that this chat application was much more feature complete than we initially thought. I thought it was just going to be a simple IM message between the two, but it had quite a bit of functionality. Right here, this is actually still in the chat application where the teacher can actually remotely browse the file system of the student. But there was no way to, like, there's no like dot directory where it can help you traverse back up, to a, so this is kind of confined right now to the student 3's My Documents folder. But if you right click on it, you can still actually delete and view these files through this chat application. And so next we wanted to figure out if these file operations were being executed as the logged in student, or if those were also, they forgot to drop their privileges to that of the student and being executed as system. And that's when we brought it open in IDA again and noticed that, yes, actually all of the file operations were being executed as system. And then right at the end, they're setting access to everyone, a chmod 777 almost, if you will. So that was interesting. And we did a few tests where we would create a file with an administrative account, lock it down privilege-wise or permission-wise, and then see if the student could delete, or through that teacher's view, if we could delete it or view it. And even though the student couldn't, we could still perform file operations on it. So we definitely knew it was being executed as system. And that's when this brought us to our, is this the fourth finding? I think so. With the highest CVSS score of 9.8 of incorrect default permissions, because now we have a primitive to read, write, and delete any file that this application can see, this chat application. But to kind of enumerate why that score got so high is we wanted to see if we could traverse the file directory. Right now, it being just in the My Documents folder, it doesn't help us very much as an attacker. So we wanted to see if there's any way to move up to a more restrictive file path or whatever. And that's when we found this kind of convoluted path here of, but the teacher was able to actually set the root file path of the remote student remotely as well. So at this point right here, if this teacher just set it to like the C drive, for instance, we would have system level file system access, meaning we can view, delete any file on the C drive, regardless of permissions, because system is like the unrestricted account. And so at this point, this is why that CVSS back previous slide was so high. Is at this point we could really do anything. We could overwrite system files. We could drop malware, um, all from a remote attack vector. And so that's exactly what we did. Is we wanted to overwrite a a binary that we knew would be executed with also the same system privileges, in knowing that all of the um, uh, NetApp Vision Pro plugins and binaries start as system. We decided to just change this work file path to the default install directory of NetApp Vision and overwrite one of their plugins. And to kind of lay that out in maybe a more simplified view, I like looking at code. I'll kind of show this code here. So um, this is this is the entire attack script of how we gain system level privileges on the student computer. First of all, if we don't pass in an IP, we will find all of this targets on the network, all the students that have this software installed. Because they're beaking it out, we can create a list of them and then enumerate through each of the list of target of students. We will create, like I mentioned before, the mChat client, which is the chat application, also has a similar paradigm as the main binary, where the students actually connect to the teacher. So this thread is starting a listening socket for the chat application. Then next, we send that UDP message to the student, telling them to connect back to us. We are their teacher, even though we're not really. And then we grab all of those, the three dynamic tokens that are generated or are different, could be different. And then we finish off the handshake here with running the rest of the 11 packet handshake. And then the join is kind of a big step. So in the background, that thread is actually changing the root directory, kind of showing in the previous slide how we did that. It's doing that by just emulating that code to that of the NetApp install directory. Then we're deleting the screenshot viewer plugin in this case. And then we're dropping our malware, whatever binary we pass in from right here. And then it's saving itself as the same file name as the plugin that we just deleted. And then we start that plugin. So we're starting the screenshot viewer here. And then we just close the connection and move to the next target in the list. And to see that in action, I'll show you this video. And so again, all the students are around the attack script here. And I'm just showing that they are all just normal users on a fairly recent version of Windows and have like virus protection turned on. I had to write my own reverse shell for this demo because the antivirus kept flagging it. But so now I'm showing just the NetApp Vision client is disconnected. Then we'll start the same Python script before, but this time we've added a few flags, -S for system and -B for whatever binary we want to overwrite the screenshot viewer with. And so it scans on the network, it found the 3 vulnerable computers. It will enumerate through each one, and then these reverse shells will start popping up. And so in the background, it's starting the chat application as well, changing the directory, deleting the file, dropping in our malware, and then executing that all in what seems like a blink of an eye. And so now the attacker has disconnected. So the student has no way of knowing that there's any process really running in the background. And then we can just execute like PowerShell, for instance. And if we do a who am I, we are indeed running our code as system. And just to kind of show which computer I'm currently attacking, let's bring up a calculator. Obviously, an attacker probably wouldn't do this in the real world where it would disclose their presence. But yeah, so this was kind of showing that at this point, knowing all of that information, we were able to enumerate through each of these computers and perform the same attack on all of them. And I guess I'll just let it finish. So all of those applications are running as system, all remotely from an attacker's script over the network. And to kind of highlight just on some of the impact of this, for one, because these students broadcast out the information that can identify that they're using the software, as well as their IP address and everything we need to do to really attack them. This could be wormable. So a well-designed malware could infect one of these PCs if they brought it off the school district network, or if it is on the school district network, and then just kind of lie dormant and wait for another one of these beacon, listen for these beacons and then further the spread. Because the code that we do eventually execute runs as system, it's kind of the keys to the kingdom. We can disable antivirus, control webcams, microphones, delete any file, start ransomware. It's kind of your mind can wander. But the scenarios of kind of this is if these computers with this software are installed and are brought off the network from hybrid learning or e-learning, and or even just a student with the software installed goes to a cafe or a library, they could potentially get infected. And then if they bring these devices back to a school network, it could further the spread to each of them. To summarize our findings, we've covered the 2 critical issues here, the 4 local privilege escalations, the 3 instances of plain text sensitive data. What I didn't cover was with the scapy layers that I showed in the previous slides. We were able to actually enumerate through all of those and kind of fuzz each of the different fields, and we were able to find 6 crashes. Kind of right now we're just labeling them as denial of service. We didn't enumerate through the exploitability of each one because there was a passive least resistance. But we disclosed all of them to NetOp, and we followed our 90-day disclosure period. They were very responsive. As soon as we disclosed to them, they began working on fixes. They patched most of the issues in the latest version of 9.7.2. They still, their network traffic is still unencrypted. However, they have done like a temporary patch where the sensitive data, like Windows credentials and stuff, are actually encrypted with inside of the unencrypted packet. So that's good to see it that and they have a planned future release where they plan on rolling out full network encryption. We disclosed this on 12/11/2020 and publicly released it on 3/21/21. I appreciate you guys tuning in for my talk. If you want to find out more information, we go into some more details at our blog. You can visit there from this link, and you can also see some of our ATR's research there. And we'll be coming out with more stuff there as well. If you need to email me, there's my email right there. But I will gladly take any questions if you guys have any.
Thanks, Sam. I was actually really looking forward to this talk. We're going to wait for people to pick their jaw up off the ground. I'm sure a lot of people were shocked on this one. But cool. We've got Chris Craig says there were a ton of implicit trust, and besides from defeating ASLR over the wire, why would you advertise heap addresses?
Oh, I know. I had no idea. I was kind of thinking that maybe it's a way because it was all the students broadcasting out their heap address to the teacher. Maybe it was a way to have a unique identifier for the teacher or something. I never got to the bottom of why they were doing that, but I was hoping to use it at some point and I never did.
What would you say is the most egregious security error?
From this one product, is that what you're talking about,
Yes,
Chris? Okay.
that's what it sounds
Um,
like.
yeah. Like the unencrypted traffic, like it clearly seems like they might have not thought that they would ever these kind of the software would ever be taken off the network, or any malicious device ever being on the local network. So that is might have been the most egregious, but uh, there's a lot of software out there that's unencrypted. So I can't say that that's like too cringeworthy, but that definitely gave us easy entry into the software, and how kind of laid the groundwork for all of our other attacks and everything.
Yeah, as soon as you said everything was unencrypted, I was just, why?
Yeah.
But yeah, like you said, I'm sure a lot of software out there is unencrypted.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming since the idea behind it was that most people wouldn't be taking this off network, as far as gaining access to a machine, you would have to be on the same VLAN, right?
Apps. Yeah. So that was there are they do have some software that ties into like Google Classroom, and works on like Chromebooks, that seem to be more e-learning, if I can use that word, like where that does kind of happen more over the network. However, we still thought that even though you have to be on the local network, this is still a pretty big target, and um, I don't think any administrator would uninstall like their software suite, with this installed, before they lend out these computers to the students. So, um, I think that if they're bringing them home, this probably would still be running on them if your
Yeah,
if your school district is using the software.
yeah. Carl, I think I asked your question just in a little bit of a different way. Is that
Yeah, and
correct?
Carl, there's nothing that we saw really could be attacked over the internet. Yeah, so we did see that they do have guidelines of kind of setting it up through an RDP or VPN, but at that point we would still have to break through those layers to get to the software.
All right. Well, thanks, Sam. I really enjoyed that talk.
Oh, excellent! Thank you so much for tuning in.
Yeah, no worries.